You're intelligent, capable, and ambitious. But every time you try to move forward, your brain floods with doubts, worst case scenarios, risks, and what ifs. When it comes to opportunities, most people can usually see one path of possible outcomes. Some people can see a few. And what about you? Well, if you're watching this video, you're probably someone who can see lots of different outcomes using your analytical mind. Not just that, you're probably someone who can order them and figure out which is the most likely outcome and target it. Your analytical mind is your superpower. You see the angles others miss, and you see opportunities others simply can't. But there's a significant problem with all of this. This one outcome grows in your mind. It represents the worst case scenarios with low probability that over time completely consumes you. It stops you from taking any action and freezing in paralysis and ultimately stopping you from achieving your goals. So why does this happen? Why can't you stop thinking about this one thing? And why can't you override it? How can you make progress? And what's the solution? And remember, this is only just one way your brain can trap you. There are plenty of others, but if you can break this one, which we'll talk through, you can probably break most of them. I spent years trying to figure this out. It really frustrated me, and it totally destroyed my self-confidence, especially as people around me, I just noticed seemed to keep moving. It was a real relief when I finally figured out a way through all of this. And it's a process I've successfully used with hundreds of people, kind of similar to me. Here's a screenshot of those people. So in this video, I'm going to help you resolve all of this. Now, part one, your blind spot. This. Overthinking, your ability to analyze and think deeply, is like having an enormous radar scanning for risks and threats constantly. It's an incredibly useful skill, especially if you're in roles where you need to identify risks. But there's a really big problem here. There's some downsides. Your brain is wired to be extremely sensitive to any type of threat, any types of threats. Worst case scenarios, even tiny ones, will consume you. And it just kind of bounces around in your head. So I've got a little image here of an echo chamber, right? It's like an uncontrolled chain reaction. One thought leads to another, leads to more thoughts, and you just start thinking about worse and worse scenarios. A quick personal example. This is something that, I always like to think about for me. If I'm jumping off something, even if it is relatively safe, I get a flash of all of these thoughts about how I could die, right? It's what's below the surface, or what happens to my spine when I hit the water, what happens to my head, how long will I get held underwater? And it's just, you feel this flood of kind of thoughts coming in. Now, it's a kind of thoughts that would just stop me and really prevent me from taking action when I probably could just jump. So going back to this image, this is what is going on here. You've got this worst case scenario, this chain reaction getting worse and worse in your mind. Every time you think about it, it gets worse. So why can't you switch it off? Why can't you override it? So part two is about the override malfunction. The override fallacy. You flagged a real threat in your brain. You're intelligent enough to see it, and others don't. But the problem is, your primitive brain feels this threat, and it's completely automatic, so you don't really have a choice. You've raised the alarm, and now it's too late. It's kind of like this. Alarm is too real to just talk yourself down. Any pacifying feels like an insult to your intelligence, and that's why it doesn't work, to just tell yourself to kind of calm down and get on with it. It's because you've already raised the threat. Every day you delay it, it just gets worse. Right? And it just keeps expanding. So you can't afford to let this loop continue to go on. And even after a break, so even if you take like a mindful break, when you return, you'll simply carry on where you left off. And it just keeps growing. And at this point, you can usually only think about the bad scenario. And it now feels like an inevitable scenario. And by this point, all your brain power is allocated to this worst case scenario, which should have been a lot smaller, and not on what's most important. You're paralyzed with no action being taken. So how can you fix it? We need to recalibrate your brain. So this is part three. The problem isn't knowing the risk, right? Identifying it. We already established that that's your superpower. The problem is trusting your action when the alarm bell is actually ringing. You can't outthink fear. You really have to train your brain to move through it in some way. And we'll go into some tactics in a minute. It's a bit like an elite athlete training under pressure, or a boxer sparring with a trainer. Full contact. This is really important here. Your brain only truly learns from some type of contact, a real world experience, not lectures, not overthinking it. So it's not theorizing about it, but it has to be done at the right dose. And this is where a lot of people get it, have trouble with this. In another video, which hopefully I'll link up somewhere, I go through this graph, and I'll go through this in a bit more detail in the future. But what we're looking at is we're trying to find a point where you can start taking action. And it's not so much that you freeze, and not too little that it's kind of boring or not making any progress. And this is the amount of exposure to that thing. It's actually quite difficult to figure out what point this is. And it depends how much experience you have in the space. But we can think about it like this. This is how it's done in professional areas, right? I mean, it's fairly obvious when you think about a couple of examples here. Flight simulators. You need to get comfortable with the uncertainties before you take the plane up. And it's the same thing with something like diving. You would dive at much lower platforms first. So we can do the same thing. We can build it carefully and strategically. Now, the good thing about something like diving is you're actually doing the dive. So you can actually train yourself up with this. So even if you've got concerns and fears, you can work through them systematically. Now, we can do this with whatever you're working on in your goals using the analytical side of your brain. Remember, this is your superpower, but you may have to take a different route and a different pace than others. And we're not going to go this route with taking unconsidered extreme exposure therapy. That would be the equivalent of just jumping straight from the 10-meter platform, straight away without any technique or anything, where you actually potentially can put yourself into some danger. But also, it can just be so overwhelming that you don't actually learn from the experience. And then you might have an issue with your brain avoiding wanting to do it again. So how do we build this? This is what I like to call battle plans. Before the fear strikes you and you start overthinking and it really kicks in, you must already know what action looks like. So what the desired thing that you want to do is, what emotions will try and hijack you. This is really key. So we can get ahead of the game here. What your exact move will be at that point. And we can leverage your analytical brain power to really solve all of this. The important stage is we need a way to calibrate your brain. And we can do that using intentionally designed calibration moments in your mind. What is this? Well, when we're experiencing this thing, we need to create these small, low-risk moves under some pressure. And we can gradually retune your risk perception. And this is about relearning. Not every alarm means some kind of catastrophic disaster, and that's what we're trying to get rid of. It's this programming that your brain has kind of gone out of control. It's this runaway chain reaction. You don't fix this by thinking differently in a way, right? So you can't keep thinking about this. It doesn't solve it. You fix it by moving differently under pressure. Just like this. So if you're in a simulator or if you're practicing presentations, and I did this with a client of mine years ago where we systematically worked their presentation skills. They were so concerned about speaking in a big group. We did a we did a practice where they would speak in front of one person in their team and then two people plus supervisor. And we continuously scaled this up until they were speaking in front of 50 people. Now, you can take lots of courses in all of this, but if you can't alleviate the in-world practice, you'll often just ruminate about this thing. So you have to find ways to systematically build yourself up. Now, what if you still can't get yourself to act? Okay, so this was when you might need some external recalibration. So if you're stuck, sometimes you might need some outside help. This is where you might want to find some trusted calibration from someone you know. It could be a colleague, a friend, or a coach or something. Think of it like a sparring partner, someone who can push you without knocking you out, right? Or a piano tuner, someone to help your brain tune yourself before it drifts too far out of key. And that's what happens when you get into these overthinking cycles. How do you know if it's working? Well, you will notice you're able to move progressively during the alarm. There'll be less energy on what ifs. Your brain starts trusting action more than the analysis, right? So there'll be a switch over, and that can take quite a while. So you need to practice this a lot. Remember, more action will give you more evidence, which will feed back into your brain, which will allow you to trust yourself, which will lead you to more action, right? And you have to take this really slowly and steadily. Now, if you've watched my other video, which where I talk about the overthinkers trap, think about Ollie the octopus. Okay. Remember, confidence isn't built from thinking more. It's built from moving. It's built from moving more, even when your brain is screaming at you. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.